So just a reminder, every year our workshop organizers incorporate your survey feedback to improve the workshop. So based on previous feedback, we've included interdisciplinary speakers and allowed for more time throughout the workshop for networking, you may have noticed. So please make sure to complete the survey at the end of the day to help guide us in future years. As a reminder, we are using Mentimeter for questions during this afternoon's sessions. For those of you who aren't familiar, Mentimeter is a live polling tool that gives us feedback in real time. So now I'd like to introduce the speakers for the Climate Communication Stories of Sustainability panel. During this session, remember to think of questions and enter them in Mentimeter after the last speaker for a Q&A session. So our next panel will be moderated by Zahir Ringgold Cordes, the Environmental Education and Outreach Program Assistant for the Ecology and Natural Resources Program at UF IFAS Extension, Sarasota County.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and hello, everyone. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our speakers for this panel. First, Kasey Gaylord-Opalewski. She is the Associate Director of Programs at Earth Echo International. She is an award-winning marine science educator and digital program designer with over 20 years of experience engaging audiences in ocean and climate literacy. She specializes in creating dynamic, research-informed learning experiences that inspire curiosity and conservation action in teachers, educators, and young people. Thank you, Kasey, for being here today. Next, Dr. Sadie Hundemer. Dr. Hundemer is a researcher and an assistant professor in the Department of Agricultural Education and Communication at the University of Florida. Her research focuses on mitigating partisanship in agriculture and natural resources and exploring drivers of attitudes and behaviors to increase behavior adoption and create durable change. Thank you, Dr. Hundemer. And finally, we'll hear from Jack Berry, who is the founder and leader of the Garbage Men, a Sarasota-based band that has graced national and international stages to deliver messages of sustainability and creativity by playing music with DIY instruments forged from recycled materials. Thank you, Jack. So if we can get our hook slide up, we have a couple images, and I have a question for the audience. Looks like we're almost there. So there's a slide with 3 images on it before their presentations. Yeah, perfect. All right, so you don't have to answer this out loud, but audience members, if you wouldn't mind taking a look at these images, do they have anything in common? What do you notice about them? How do you think they might relate to climate communication? So take a couple moments to think about that. Though some of them are seemingly unrelated, all of these images represent a diversity of ways to communicate about climate and environmental issues to effectively inspire action and change. So effective communication, it really goes hand in hand with connection, and there's many different ways to connect with audience members. Each of our panelists today are going to share their unique expertise on how to connect audiences to an important message. First, we'll hear from Kasey.
Thank you, Zahir, and thank you to everyone who organized this fantastic day. Oh my gosh, my heart and soul are full, and I'm so excited to be here. But hello, everybody. My name is Kasey Gaylord-Opalewski, and I'm the Associate Director of Programs at Earth Echo International. There we go. And I'm going to talk to you about mobilizing the next generation for community action. And I have a clicker, don't I? I can communicate, but I can't figure out the technology, but that's all right. So just to give you a little bit of background about where I work, Earth Echo International is an environmental nonprofit organization that was founded 20 years ago by 2 siblings, Philippe and Alexandra Cousteau. Does that last name ring a bell with anybody? Okay, I'm talking to the right group, great. So they are the grandchildren of famous ocean explorer Jacques Cousteau, and they founded our organization 20 years ago in honor of their father, Philippe Sr., because he had the belief that youth had the power to change the planet. And this morning we had such a good question for one of our keynotes, and it was, what can we do to engage youth? And she said, ask them, ask them. I was sitting back there and I was like, yes, yes. So this is really what we do at Earth Echo. We believe that youth have the power to change the planet, and so we as adults who have the tools, the resources, the experience, let's open the door and let them in and let them lead the way. So Earth Echo International, like I said, we were founded 20 years ago, and we have reached over 2 million people in over 150 countries. This slide's slightly outdated. But our mission is to restore and protect our ocean planet. We're trying to build a global youth movement to restore and protect our ocean planet. So each and every single day, our staff work to expedite and elevate youth-led ocean and climate action. We also connect youth to a broader community of ocean activism and advocacy. We build ocean, climate, and environmental literacy in youth by working with the adults that work with youth as well. And I do want to just kind of give you a menu of what our programming is. So we have a variety of programs at Earth Echo. We have programs that work directly with young people. They can properly apply to be part of some of our Ambassador and Youth Leadership Council programs. We also work boots on the ground with some of our programs like the Water Challenge with teachers, educators, the adults working with young people. We also have a STEM competition, and we have an Earth Echo Academy, which is a suite of resources for adults and even young learners to use to become more environmentally literate about STEM topics. So I do just want to point out a couple of opportunities for those in the room here. So I said we do connect youth to a broader community. We have an online platform called Gen C, and it is an online platform that we built about 2 years ago. For lack of a better description, it is a non-toxic social media that kind of looks like Facebook for students that have an environmental interest. This platform is appropriate for ages 13 to 25, and they can connect with their peers on this platform. Just go to genc.org to create your account, but they work together to learn from one another, take collective action. We even host monthly advocacy workshops on this platform as well. Now, for the adults in the room that work with young people, we also have an educator community called the Educator Echo. If you want to scan that QR code, I'll give you a second. That will get you to a sign-up page to sign up for our monthly emails. They're very short and sweet. I write them myself. If they're not short and sweet, you email me back and tell me. But we'd like to share out our resources as well as any of our partners' resources, opportunities like grants, scholarships, so on and so forth. So that was just kind of setting the stage here of what we do at Earth Echo. So I was told that we would like to hear, I'm sorry, I'm really distracted because my slides look really weird to me because the formatting is all off. So we were told to have advice to the community about how we can communicate specifically around the climate. So these were 3 tips that came to my mind, and I'm gonna back them up with one particular story. But knowing your audience and meeting them where they are. Be open to change your message and language. Explore maybe shared vocabulary and avoiding trigger words. And don't assume anything. Don't assume anything. Just because I'm in a room with everybody here, I probably shouldn't assume that you know where Sarasota Bay is, even though I hope we all do. But don't assume anything about your audience. So since we let youth lead at Earth Echo International, I want to tell you a story about one of our young leaders. His name is Nicholas Lamas, and Nicholas joined us at Earth Echo when he was about 15 years old. He is from South Florida, and he joined us as a Water Challenge ambassador. So the goal of a Water Challenge ambassador is to work closely with our Water Challenge program. They go out to a local body of water of their choosing. They test the quality of that water, they share it on our database, and then they also lead events in their community to educate others about the importance of water quality. Well, Nicholas got really excited during his tenure as an ambassador, and he started his own local project called the Grove Project, and it focused on mangrove health, educating folks about mangroves, and coastal resiliency. Nicholas then went on to apply to become part of our Youth Leadership Council. And through that 2-year-long tenure, he had the opportunity to speak at international events and world stages. For example, Nicholas really got into policy and advocacy, and specifically about the role of government in our policies and how communities can pivot those policies by the way that they vote at the ballot box. He was really interested in this and really took to the movement of 30 by 30, which is protecting 30% of the ocean by the year 2030. He became so versed in this topic that he was invited to speak at the UN, so that's that picture on the lower right. And he's also spoke at New York Climate Week, and he's also spoke at world stages. This conference name is really long. The One Planet Ocean Summit for the Ocean was in France. So Nicholas has taken his work far beyond. He is a graduate of Columbia University, and he also now is at Stanford, and he is getting his degree in environmental law. So I just want to tell a quick story about Nicholas before we invite our next speaker up. We take our students to Capitol Hill quite often, and we teach them about policy and advocacy and teach them about how we can make real sustainable change. So Nicholas was part of one of the first groups that we took to DC, to Capitol Hill, to meet with our lawmakers. We had an appointment, since Nicholas is in Florida, we had an appointment with his Floridian senator, I'm not going to name any names, and we had an appointment with him, and so we take a group of students into this office, and me as an adult, I'm just there to be the adult. I literally sit back and I let the young people lead the way and talk to the representative that they're talking to. Within about 60 seconds, Nicholas had said, I want to tell you about the amazing work that we're doing to fight climate change. How do you think that went? It was really great. I was at the table and I was just observing. I watched this representative put down his pen, close his notebook, and shove it in front of him. And I thought, how are these kids going to react to this? How are they going to pivot? Nicholas did not skip a beat. I could tell he started to get a little nervous. He did not skip a beat. He went on to talk about his project, the Grove Project, the work, the speaking engagements that he's done at the UN, and it was interesting. So after that, we all scuttled out of that building, and we met on the sidewalk, and I said, how do you think that went? And they all kind of looked at me just totally stunned. They said, I did not realize that somebody would physically shut down like that. And I said, why do you think that is? And one of them said, it was when he said climate change. Trigger word, trigger word. So since then, so we had a nice regrouping. We failed forward. We took that lesson and we talked about, okay, what does the next meeting look like? And we started screening, oh my God, which offices are we going in next? And so we tried to pivot. We're like, what else can we say besides climate change? And we had listened to that representative, and they had said climate effects. And we're like, let's use that, flip it, swap it out. Like anything you're gonna say, just try and swap it out. So now, years later, we still take young people to Capitol Hill. We use that story of Nicholas, but we also use that story to prepare them, to have them research, know their audience. They research which offices they're going into. Even if they're not meeting with the specific representative, we know if we're going to meet with an intern and we have that intern's name. So they basically stalk them online and they try and figure out where are some common grounds here, what are their viewpoints, all these things. What are the viewpoints of the office? And so knowing your audience, but then also maybe thinking about meeting them where they're at. What is some language? What are shared vocabulary that we can use? What are trigger words that we can avoid? So that story of Nicholas, I was there to bear witness to it, was just pretty incredible. We still talk about it to this day. And it's really amazing of how that young man, I believe at the time he was 18, pivoted his dialogue and just kept going forward. It was pretty impressive. I'll just briefly bring this up. This might come up later, but we worked with another young man. I wanted to bring Florida stories to Sarasota. This is a young man, Dimitri, in Tampa. As you can imagine, his focal point was around Gasparilla. So we might be able to get to this when we have our panel discussion, so I'm not going to say much about that. But I do just want to offer up that if you do also believe that youth have the power to change the planet, we invite you at Earth Echo to join us. I want you to think about how you could potentially work with us. We do a lot of different things. I'm here all day. I'll be at the social, and happy to talk with you about how we can collaborate to really open those doors for young people and allow them to lead. So again, join us to build this movement of climate resiliency. We need to do it with a speed and audacity that we've never known before. And these young people are here to do it. They are showing up every day, and they inspire me every single day. So you can follow us on all the socials. There you go. So I will turn it back to Zahir. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasey. We'll have Dr. Hundemer come on up.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Sadie Hundemer. I am an assistant professor at the University of Florida. I'm in our Department of Agricultural Education and Communication. And among the things that I work on, I have kind of developed this specialization in research that enables us to better communicate on partisan topics, particularly in agriculture and natural resources. I have a research lab that works on this. Half of my students are liberal, half of them are conservative, and I teach a class that develops these skills. And of course, climate change is one of these big topics that we talk about. And as I'm preparing my students, this tends to be one of the first things that I give them as an example. So, I want you to think to yourself, is this an expert on global warming? So this is Robert Linden. Robert Linden is a professor of meteorology at MIT, is educated with a PhD from Harvard, and has memberships in the American Meteorological Society and the National Academy of Sciences. Think to yourself, is Robert Linden an expert on global warming? Well, we're going to see what other people think about this as well, and we are going to map it. On the one axis, we have the probability of agreeing that Robert Linden is an expert, and across the bottom, from very liberal to very conservative. Now, what I didn't tell you is that Robert Linden also said something, and what he said is, judged by conventional scientific standards, it is premature to conclude that human CO2 emissions, so-called greenhouse gases, cause global warming. Now, you might be thinking, oh, maybe my impression of Robert Linden is changing. Well, let's see what other people think. Well, looks like our very conservative people think that Robert Linden is indeed an expert, and our liberals think he's not. But wait a minute, what if that's not what Robert Linden said? What if this is what he said? It is now beyond reasonable scientific dispute that human activity is causing global warming and other dangerous forms of climate change. Now what do you think about Robert Linden? Our liberals say he's an expert, our conservatives say he is not. And this is what I tell all of my students and all of you when you are taking facts to people and trying to being an expert on a topic. Well, people are going to decide if you're an expert, depending on if you're telling them what they wanted to hear in the first place. And so if facts don't work, then what are we going to do? So, what's happening when we do this is what we might call motivated reasoning. That when we have a scientific message, we have what our Democrats and our liberals already believe, and we have what our conservative Republicans are already going to believe, and they hear the part of that overlaps with what they already knew, and they disregard the rest. And actually, the smarter people are, the more knowledge they have about climate change, the better they are at doing this. They actually get worse in their understanding of scientific knowledge based on how much they know, because they're more able to do this motivated reasoning. And so this is where I spend my time. It's like, okay, the facts are not going to sell it. What are we going to do in this space? And ultimately, generally, what tends to be persuasive is values. And we can talk values about the science, and that's what enables people then to think and be more welcoming of those facts. And there's many different ways that we can categorize values. I like to use this framework that was developed by Jonathan Haidt. He wrote a book called The Righteous Mind, and he talks about moral foundations, that all people have certain values built into them. And the first of those is care. And so we can talk about climate change in terms of care. In fact, this happens a lot. But usually when we talk about care, we do so applying the value in a way that a liberal is most likely to use it. So we're caring for other species. We're caring about all kinds of different vulnerable populations. But we can do the same thing in a way that resonates with conservative audiences. We talk about care for farmers who are going to have a lot more difficulty operating in this environment. We can talk about fairness, and we do talk about fairness a lot of times, but we can talk about fairness to different types of communities. How are rural communities, how are affected? How about those communities in Appalachia after the big hurricane? We can talk about communities that are really resonant with those groups. Loyalty. Loyalty is built into us as Americans more than anything else, right? We are wanting to be loyal to our country, and that's a value that really resonates with conservative audiences. And one way we can do that is by developing American energy independence. We're taking care of our nation through this climate action. Authority. Authority is really resonant with conservative audiences and not so much with liberal audiences. That's why it doesn't tend to be used as much in these spaces. There's authority to scientists, but there's also authority to the farmer who is speaking and saying, this is what I'm seeing on my field. Might not call it climate change. We might call it changing weather patterns or developing resilience. We can hear authority from EV vehicle manufacturers who are saying this is not only what we need to do in the environment and for the environment, but to what is going to make us successful in the United States. Let's talk about liberty. This is another big foundation. This is our Declaration of Independence right here. Well, we want to have the liberty to live the way we've always lived. And purity. Purity of our environment. And particularly in this country where we're a young country, we don't have those human-built monuments, we have natural monuments. Let's protect that. All of these values are built into us as human beings. If you look across cultures around the world, you will see these as core. But we all apply them in different ways and to different extents. Now, here's how these values tend to be applied in the United States and how they are accepted or rejected. So on our y-axis here, we have how much each of those values is endorsed or rejected as part of morality. And across the bottom, our scale from liberal to conservative. And what we see is on the conservative side, pretty much all of those moral values are accepted as part of morality. Over there on the liberal side, a much more acceptance for care and fairness and liberty. Those are generally accepted as part of morality. But then we have loyalty and purity and authority that a lot of times are seen as counter to morality. And so now imagine, we don't have to imagine, just position yourself where you fall on this spectrum. Let's say, as is probably the case, because we know this is how it tends to happen with people who are speaking on topics of sustainability, is probably a lot of you are following on that liberal side. And so when you are talking about a topic like climate change, you're probably speaking about it with those values that are most resonant with you. And if you're doing so, you're missing half of what conservatives really care about. In fact, maybe you're saying some of these things aren't morality, when in fact, half of your audience thinks it is. And on the other hand, I imagine we also have some conservatives in this room, and they tend to be talking from this wider range of morality that half of it might not be endorsed by the people that they are talking to. So, my recommendation is speak about values and not facts. And I don't mean disregard the facts, but you have to be connecting to the values with those facts to make them resonant and heard. And as you're doing so, make sure it's the audience's values that you're communicating with, not just your own. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hundemer. Jack, if you'd like to come up.
Hello. Thanks for having me here. Has anybody seen me before? Cool. Has anybody heard me before? Okay. Who has not seen or heard me? Okay. I think I will give some more background information then. Anyway, for those of you who have and have not seen me, I am recognizable, people have told me. And part of that is definitely just I like to look this way. However, it's a form of communication as well. When you choose to dress yourself or cut your hair or do things like that, sometimes you are deliberately or just inadvertently telling the world something about yourself. So on our panel, we're talking about communication, and there's a lot of forms of communication. And what we do with our band is communicate through not just music, but also visuals and performance and that sort of thing. So my band is called the Garbage Men. And we've been doing this for 15 years now. And I was so honored and so grateful to be approached to participate in this. And they asked me, do you want to be part of the climate communication or part of the business? Because we are a band, we do play at events, restaurants, bars, take tips when we play on the street. We're a business of sorts too, but I just thought to myself, what we really are doing is communicating, and our passion is sharing the joy and inspiration that we get from what we do with our community. So here I am with two very inspiring other people with whom I resonated so much with what they were saying too, but I have a little bit of a different perspective from the world I come from. Do I press the next arrow?
Yep.
Okay. So anyway, here's a picture of our band. We're called the Garbage Men. We make all of our instruments from things that we found in the garbage. And we started when I was 13 in middle school in 2010. And we didn't just start off and say, you know what, let's make a band that communicates about the climate and about sustainability. It was kind of an organic growth to that point. But this is my guitar, and it might not look like a guitar, but it's got one string. It's made of a Lucky Charms cereal box with a Tupperware on the back. The neck is a yardstick, the frets are toothpicks, and my whammy bar is a comb, and the shoelace I use for my strap. And in the band, we also have drums made from various pieces of trash and buckets and cans and things. A bass guitar similar to that. And then over the last few years, we've added singing to the band. I was kind of nervous to sing early in my career, but we made old telephones, the kind that existed before cell phones, with the rotary dials or the buttons, and converted them to speak and sing into. So guitars facilitate social change. You can think back over the course of our American musical pop cultural history and think of some musicians who maybe have inspired you, or different movements in our social history where music has been part of the social change. That's Woody Guthrie there with his famous guitar. These are a couple more of our guitars on the right. And in the middle is just a direct example of when we perform locally at some schools. Sometimes the teachers send us a picture a few weeks later and say, look what some of our kids have done. So yeah, there's a question, you can think about it. I'm sure you can imagine an example. And it's an interesting history that I've learned over the years too with instruments and music. I'm kind of a amateur ethnomusicologist, and one of my passions is studying the history and anthropology of music in different cultures. But guitars specifically, the string instruments that have come from the East, China, Africa, they have a long tradition of being improvised and homemade and built by the musicians themselves in their own local communities. It's not always how we kind of imagine it here with our top-down rock and roll structure of, Fender or Gibson or Les Paul, made in factories somewhere, and kids have to save up their money to buy them. So I've just imagined things like the cigar box guitars of some of the blues musicians, even within this country, or the banjos in Appalachia, which have a long history too. All of these things are things that people, the instruments, and the people who play them have done themselves, independently with resilience. When I was in school, right about the time when I started my band, we were learning about the climate, we were learning about sustainability, global warming, and the way that it was communicated to us, from my perspective, it was very inspiring, and it totally changed the way I thought about my place on Earth and the way I wanted to live my life. So I started making choices and changing things so that I could be a upstanding, sustainable citizen. But I know for a lot of kids, and from their families too, they had other messaging coming in, and I can speak for myself and my classmates that the messaging was very negative. We watched this great film, An Inconvenient Truth, but it was scary. And we learned about recycling, and we learned about sustainable development. But so many of these things, the message was, if we don't do this, and if we don't stop doing this, then in this many years, this is going to happen. And I think at this point in time, everybody in our country has heard about these things. We don't need to be necessarily raising awareness that climate change is happening or the things that might or might not happen. Lots of people have formed an opinion. Their minds are where they are. What happens, even if you have an open mind as a child, some of these things can be paralyzing or overwhelming. And so what really got me going and started giving me some hope and stuff was some stuff that I learned subsequently after school. The transition movement. Has anybody heard of the transition movement? Yes. It's so cool. It's so inspiring. We have a local version of it here. It used to be called Transition SRQ, and now it's Community Harvest SRQ. But for me, when I heard about this, it again totally changed my perspective on things. And the main idea is kind of a radical one, but do we have to have growth? Do we have to have an economy that's always built on growth? Do we have to, as individuals, try and make as much money and be as successful as we can? It's up to you. But what I learned from this was a way of reimagining our place as individuals in a small community. And it was so inspiring because instead of like, don't eat at fast food restaurants, don't drive your car so much, don't use these various things, it was more do this, do that. Plant your own plants, grow your own food, develop clubs, organizations, and things within your own community. And that to me was so inspiring. There's a picture of Community Harvest as well. So anyway, just a quick story of our band. We started when I was in middle school, and I just wanted to make a guitar for myself because I didn't have one. And I didn't have any woodworking tools or anything like that, so I just used what was lying around the house. And I brought it into school, and when I shared it with my friends, they said, let's make a whole band out of stuff like this. And of course, when you're that age, everybody wants to join your band. So we had to come up with a way to limit the size of our ensemble. And the rule that we came up with was, if you want to join our band, you have to make your own instrument, and you can only use things that we found in the trash. So we started performing very organically. The only place we could, just going out on the streets. It's called busking or street performing. And a few years later, on a school field trip, we met a street performer in Boston who said something that stuck with me, which was street performing is the most direct way of communicating with your audience. There's no commercialization, commodification, mass production of any sort of product or CD. It's direct. You're there in the moment, on the same level with the people, your audience, And if they want to support what you're doing, they'll give you money. If they don't, they walk right by. That's how we got started. People took notice. We were in some local media and national media as well. You can see clips on the internet. But after we graduated from school, high school, we went to different colleges, and I continued playing here in the community and started to do a lot more community events, learning about these things that I mentioned earlier. And that became so much more fulfilling for me. Here's a picture of us at the library at a local school. And then most recently, just last year, we started to write some of our own songs that do not directly tell people what to do, but tell our own story. And we will be performing some of those later. And I just wanted to mention all of these things which I've said. I didn't realize that someone else had already thought of them before. If you want to find out more about them, this French group from the 1920s, they're called Situationist International. And here's just their manifesto. It's a very interesting thing. The Situationists believe that the shift from individual expression through directly lived experience or firsthand fulfillment of authentic desires to individual expression by proxy through exchange of consumption of commodities or passive secondhand alienation inflicted significant and far-reaching damage to the quality of human life for both individuals and society. Important concept of their theory was primary means of counteracting the spectacle, constructing situations, moments of life deliberately constructed for the purpose of reawakening and pursuing authentic desires, experiencing the feeling of life and adventure and the liberation of everyday life. So when we're performing, we play in bars and restaurants. We play for people who their own t-shirts and hats tell the world, my mind is closed, don't try to change my mind. But we're there at everyone's level, equitably doing what we're doing, and we have seen already young and old, adults, children, come up to us and say, I am thinking about recycling, I'm thinking about reusing, I made my own guitar, things like that. And we'll be playing later today, but if you want to see us elsewhere, you can go to our website, thegarbagemen.com. We're at Shred Stock at the Van Wezel tomorrow, Saturday morning, where you can shred documents. Thank you.
Thank you so much, speakers. Thank you, everyone, for listening to these amazing insights. We're going to move into our round table. Just get a couple of minutes to move a little bit.
The round carpet.
It's a round carpet. Sounds good. I'll take that one. I'll pass it. All right. So let's get into this topic a little deeper. Panelists, how can we reframe climate communication and messaging to build bridges rather than barriers between people and climate action?
One of the things that I find is really important is to distinguish between climate science and climate policy or climate action. We saw an inconvenient truth up here on the screen a minute ago, and part of the reason that some people believe that we ended up where we did, as divisive as climate change is because of videos like that. Because it said, this climate science, this is happening, and therefore we must. And by tying those two things together, if someone then was like, well, I don't like the thing that we have to do, then you know what I'll do? Let me just take a step back. And we're doing this without knowing it in our heads and saying, I'm going to dismiss that science as a way of dismissing the policy. It's what's called solution aversion. We all do it. It just happens without us realizing we're doing it. And so what I try to do is distinguish between this is the climate science, and there's a whole host of things that we could do in response to it, including nothing. That is also an option. But let's distinguish between the two so that we don't immediately shut down the science.
Yes, of course. So how do we reframe climate communication and messaging to build bridges rather than barriers?
I mean, I feel like you just talked about that.
Yeah, I've found through my experience, just within our own community, there's a lot of people who don't want to know anything about climate science. And what can be inspiring if they don't even want to hear statistics or things that they feel like they're being told to do, is just to see an example of somebody or a group of people doing something. So I'm not saying that we're the best example of how to live your life. I like the way that I live my life, though, and I am proud to share it and happy to tell you more about what I'm doing. But when we perform, we're playing for people who don't even live here. Many of them are tourists or seasonal people visiting too. So we reach a wider audience than we ever intended to. And a lot of them have directly said to us that, this is actually inspiring. And it doesn't even have to do with them thinking or accepting something about the climate. It's just even a small action, like making something themselves instead of buying it, or being independent from corporations and things like that in some small way, I think is a good step.
Yeah, and I feel like the one tip I had of meet people where they are, it can go both ways. And I feel like, you're in a setting and those people are meeting you where you're
Exactly.
at. And you're not even having that conversation. But I think it is important that if you're talking to a certain audience, meet them where they're at, understand it, let's just avoid those barriers.
Great, thank you. So be the solution in your actions and the way you show up, and meeting people where they are, and getting to distinguish between those solutions and what the science is saying. Thank you. Can you share any anecdotes or examples of successful education and communication efforts that have garnered buy-in or acceptance from diverse audiences? So any stories or examples you have?
I have one example. I kind of previewed it before. I don't know if we can bring that slide up of Gasparilla that was behind me, but that's okay. We had a young person who, like I said, I prefaced it, his name is Dimitri. He grew up in Tampa. He was a homeschool student, and he joined Earth Echo International, again, as a Water Challenge ambassador. That's often the program that a lot of students on board with us. And he started testing his local waterways in Tampa, got really excited, might not be the right word, but infuriated, excited about the opportunity that Gasparilla brings in Tampa. I'm sure many of you know, but I'm not going to assume, but Gasparilla is an annual event where we have a faux pirate invasion and people throw beads everywhere and they end up in the river and subsequently in Tampa Bay. So Dimitri and his younger brother had witnessed this for years. And so he started to develop a project called Green Gasparilla. And they worked really hard. They got as far as to having conversations with Mayor Jane Castor about banning beads. But of course, that kind of falls on deaf ears to the party goers out there. And so they never quite got to the banning beads stage. But I want to make sure I have Bead Free Bay was an initiative that they launched in 2020. And so what Dimitri and his brother started to do was then, okay, let's just kind of pivot what our initial goal was, which was to fully ban the beads. That's not going to happen, so what can we do about this? So then they started working with local organizations like Florida Aquarium, and they would organize scuba cleanups right after Gasparilla. They would go out, they even got funding for a little ROV so that they could kind of search different parts of the river to see where the beads were getting hung up, and they did this whole cleanup movement. And so that's just a really good example of how you can pivot, how you can meet your audience where it's at, and even if you feel like you're failing, and especially when you're that young and you have that big vision, it really feels hard to not have that vision come to life and to get the wind knocked out of you and say, okay, let's just take a moment and let's see how we can pivot this to still do what we want to try and do for good.
I just wanted to empathize with that child. What was his name? Dimitri. I feel like I felt a lot of passion myself, and I've also felt very crestfallen when my initiatives did not go as I planned. However, subsequently, I continued and found a lot of support in this community, and I think what it was for me too is what we've been doing with our band is meeting our audience, meeting our people at the same level, but we're doing something that's a little bit deliberately unconventional too. So that helps us to stand out, and then it gets people talking and noticing, and I think that's something that we can say would be a good piece of advice too, because if you're just there doing your thing and no one is even noticing, then no one will notice.
I tend to be on a lot of projects where we have environmental interests and agricultural interests working together on some of our big initiatives with the university, often that are funded by the USDA. And it's always, I learn something every time that I'm in one of those rooms. And the big project that I'm on right now, we had one of our kickoff meetings, and this is a climate smart program. And so the farmers that we have working on this project, they are the models of these practices. And so in particular, there's this one farmer who's in the room, and he is the poster child of this project. And all of the scientists in the room, he's the one that they go to whenever they need advice on how do we do these practices and roll them out in the best way possible. And at the end of this meeting, he says to the group, well, I don't know why you keep billing this as climate smart. I don't believe in climate change. This is, you guys are blowing it. You're blowing it by talking about it like this. And he was right. We can't, and clearly, you can be successful without having to buy into it being climate smart, because he was there. He was the model of it. And so it made us take a step back and think, well, what is the most effective way to talk about these things? Do we have to say climate change to make it happen? And that's a lesson that I took away from that moment.
Thank you. It sounds like language is really powerful in the way that we communicate, and pivoting sounds like a really big piece of advice. So thinking of what you already have that's going well and how can you change and adapt that. If each panelist could give kind of a lightning response to this last question, then we'll move into Q&A. So many who communicate about environmental issues wonder how you change someone's mind. Do you think that is the purpose? Is that what we're trying to do? Do we want to change minds, or are we changing our message? And if you believe it's changing minds, how do you do that?
I'm not trying to change anyone's mind. I'm just being myself. We're being ourselves. We have changed ourselves and learned and grown, as I showed in my slideshow. And every human in our community and in our world has that capacity. And I think just by staying true to what you believe in, other people will see that. And I've seen that in practice, and I've seen it in myself.
That's a tough question. Yeah, I agree with you, Jack. I don't think we're going to change anybody's minds, but the best we can do is try and get our messages across as effectively as we can and as non-combative, nonpartisan as we can, just to build a better world.
Completely agree. I tell my students I don't go into any of this trying to change anyone's mind. My goal is to promote communication, collaboration, and compromise, and you generally aren't going to get anyone to hear you until they feel heard, and so listening and understanding their perspective first is generally the first step for me.
Great. Thank you so much, panelists. So we have a time for a few questions from the audience. Please remember to type your questions into Mentimeter on your phone, and they will appear on the screen behind us. Remember, if you have a question for a specific speaker, please include their name when you type in your question. If you haven't joined yet, you can join using the code 6536-5247. So for our first question, how do you strike a balance between hope and realism in your communication?
I can start off with that. Since we work with so many young people at Earth Echo International, again, I'm going to go back to our keynote this morning with the kind of climate anxiety, the color wheel that we had. we talk about it. We open the door, talk about anxiety that young people are having, what are the frustrations you're having. Let's just be real about this. And I think I'm gonna go back to that story with Nicholas on Capitol Hill. Like, that was such a crazy experience to be part of, to see these very intimidating adults completely shut down to these young, they were kids who were just trying to be excited and get their message across, and they felt that they were important for that day and that adults were really hearing them, the adults that could make things happen. And that was such a disheartening experience, but for us to just kind of like take a step back and to not grumble about it, to not sit and complain about it, but to think, okay, what can we learn from that? Let's think about what happened. Let's think about what we can do better moving forward. So every single day with the young people that we work with, that's what we try and do. We be that outlet for them of, this is a space that is safe to talk about the anxieties that you're feeling and thinking, to what you're witnessing going on in our world, and let's just come to like see how we can move forward together better.
Thank you.
Well, I'll just answer about emotion in general, because I guess as academics we just answer whatever question we choose. But so we recently did this study, and I did this with a bunch of environmental educators, and what we wanted to understand was, in that K through 12 education, how the climate science affects actually climate actions, and this is like, so we're measuring it at the end of their high school career. And if you look at that connection, there's hardly any direct effect from the science they learn to taking climate action, unless emotion is in the middle. When you activate emotion, then you can activate the science to actually create action. So I think both of these matter, but it's the emotion in general that creates that need to act.
I just wanted to add, too, I have seen hope and realism very much intertwined, especially in the very first presentation about our history in this community, looking to the past for inspiration to the future. I think that's a very, very hopeful and realistic way, because it's been proven to have worked back then, and it's very hopeful to imagine learning from some of that history moving forward in the ways that people were living sustainably in our community.
Thank you. Do you agree that when appealing to conservatives, it is useful to talk about the bottom line financials, families, and rural issues, and for liberals, talking more about social and environmental impacts?
I wouldn't boil it down that simply. I think there are certainly pieces of that absolutely are more resonant with each audience. But as you saw, there are a wide range of morals that can be activated in different ways. And in fact, even like just if you're talking about keeping a pure environment, those kind of messages can actually have huge resonance with a conservative audience. And it can be just a matter of changing the phrasing of things to activate those values that are more resonant with a different group. So although there are like topical things that are resonant, but it's also just the way we talk about them. But yes, there are these connections that you're seeing.
I've met self-proclaimed liberals and self-proclaimed conservatives for whom these things are very much switched too. So everyone is an individual, and I think what you said, just meeting people at their level, again, is a way to appeal to them. Just treat them like you would want to be treated.
This one's for Kasey. Do you get involved in policy change? What do you see as one of the ways to make a difference in government to have a more resilient world?
That's a good question. So being a nonprofit organization, you have to be very careful about lobbying. And that is something that we are pretty careful about, especially when we take our young people to Capitol Hill. I will say that We do have programs. So for example, we just announced our new United States Ocean Protection Ambassadors. And these young people, they're in a few different regions of the states, and they are working to further protect or conserve an area in their region. So I'll give one example. We have a young lady from North Carolina, and her focus will be the Blake Plateau, which, if those of you who have never heard of that, it is the largest tract of deep sea coral reefs that we've discovered that spans from North Carolina all the way down to Florida. It is currently unprotected. It currently has a lot of cultural and historical significance. It is part of the Middle Passage and the Gullah Geechee Nation's heritage, and part of their story. And so before the current administration came in, we were on a movement to try and rally to get either marine protected areas in the Blake Plateau or a national marine sanctuary around the Blake Plateau. That's not happening right now. So what our young people are doing is they are concentrating on educating other folks about what is this region, so that when the time comes, we're ready to activate. And if there are petitions to sign or comments to send in, our young people can activate their communities in order to do that. I don't think I answered that fully, but that is something that's pretty relevant right now of what we're doing. But again, we walk that fine line with lobbying, but a lot of our young people, they will implement policy change. And we've had students like in Hawaii get entire plastic utensil bans in and around their island. So we have seen our young people that we work with affect policy change, which is pretty powerful.
I like that a lot, getting organized, getting that community organized to impact that change when the time comes. I think we have time for maybe one more question. With the urgency of the climate issues that are going to face future and current generations, how do we work on a way that fosters a mindset of changing the status quo sooner rather than later?
This reminds me of how inspired I felt when I first learned about the transition movement. And it's some ideas that some people put together mid-2000s, I think, but the ideas were circulating around before that, and they're still going around outside of the movement. It's just a nice label and way of organizing. But what was so inspiring for me was like sooner rather than later, you can plant something right now and it will grow. And it's something that's right there. And if it's an edible thing, you can eat it and sustain yourself independently of grocery store corporations, fast food, far traveling things. That, just as a very small example, that's something that you can do right now. Or you can make your own instrument and play it for your friends.
I would say work with young people. Open those opportunities for young people. If you know a young person, whether it's your own child, a niece, a nephew, anybody that you might know, inspire them to find their peers that feel the same way they do and let them work together and encourage them and mobilize them, give them the tools they need to make change, because the younger generations, they're there. They want to see change affected, and they know it needs to happen. And so as long as, again, we maybe step out of the way, hold that door open for them, I think the youth is the key.
And I will second that. I think that when I look at my college students and my graduate students, they are passionate about these topics and taking them on in ways that we haven't thought of and that they are better equipped to do. And they inspire me each time with new ideas about how we can move forward. And so I look to them as well.
I just have to add, I'm at an age where I'm transitioning from young person to old person, and I don't want us to forget about the old people either. They really do.
Don't forget about us.
Anybody, young or old, has the capacity for an inspirational or innovative new idea that could totally change everything.
Yes, we all changed the status quo. Thank you so much, panelists. Can we get a round of applause for our panelists?